Here we are on another episode of the Life Forces podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Because we're in Scorpio season, I've been doing some digging, right? Scorpio is about deep things, investigating emotions, taboo things, and it can also be about shared resources. It can be about finances and our relationship with things like money, especially because of the 8th house that it's associated with. And money for a lot of us can be taboo, it can be uncomfortable, it can be a place where we confront the deeper, darker parts of ourselves that we don't honestly want to deal with. And so I knew that I wanted to speak to someone about money that I really resonated with, because there's a lot of people out there talking about money, money coaches, financial experts, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, we can't possibly vibe with all of them. And I, to be honest, don't, or, you know, that's just not where I'm at in terms of, you know, the way people are saying certain things or what they're sharing. But Selomé Samuel, who's my guest on today's podcast episode, did an amazing money beliefs workshop for Aura Collective that I absolutely loved. And I really just adore and appreciate her approach to money. And I think she does an amazing job at marrying, at unifying the energetic, spiritual, emotional relationship we have with money with the more practical, gotta pay your taxes, maybe consider having a budget ways of dealing with money. So in this episode, we dive into Selomé's background, how it informed her money beliefs and her relationship with money, how she went from being in student debt and not having a great relationship with money to now being a money coach with her company, Net Positive Money, which I think is such a brilliant name. And yeah, she is a certified trauma-informed financial and life coach who wants to help people realize that anyone can be good with money, which is something that definitely comes across in everything she says, in the way that she speaks about money. And I think it's a really important point, because a lot of us, because of whatever's happened in life, our circumstances, our career path, whatever, might believe that we can't possibly be good with money or we can never have it. But she is such a great person to help us all go deeper with that, to investigate why we have those beliefs, not to just accept them at surface level. We went over so much amazing things. One thing she's really big on that I love is our relationship to money and our nervous system, and being really aware of our nervous system as we navigate different things in life in general, but especially when it comes to our finances, to not put our body in a place where it feels unsafe in terms of finances, whatever that means to you. Confronting shame and embarrassment and the deeper parts of ourselves when it comes to money, which is so appropriate for Scorpio season. Yeah, we just went into so much on this episode. I know you are all going to absolutely love it. So sit back, relax, whatever you want to do in listening to this amazing episode. Actually, maybe sit back and relax, but also you might want to take notes, because it's just like mic drop moment after mic drop moment. I swear to goodness. We had a great, great chat. So enjoy this. If you love it, I always appreciate when you share it on Instagram, when you send it to a friend, when you rate the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening. It helps people discover it. It can help this reach the people it's meant to reach. And yeah, I appreciate you all. And I hope your November is off to a great start. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on Life Forces podcast. I'm your host, Bianca, and today I have Selomé Samuel here joining us as our guest. I'm so excited to talk about money, which I don't know if I've ever said before, because it's one of those sensitive subjects, at least for me. It can be taboo for a lot of people. So I'm really excited for Selomé to talk to us about money today in a very interesting, innovative way, because what I know so far about her work is it's very different in some ways in terms of how she speaks about money and emotions and our money beliefs. So, hey, Selomé, how's it going?
Hi, I'm great. I'm so excited to be here. And I also am excited to talk about money, which is a thing that me in the past also would have been shocked to hear.
Oh, yeah. We're going to get into all of that. So, one thing I loved about your money beliefs course that you shared on Aura Collective was that you so vulnerably just like put certain things on the table about your financial history, your money beliefs, how you grew up. So I'd love if you could just tell us a little bit about your background and upbringing and how that relates to how you relate to money now and yeah, just your journey in general.
Yeah, totally. I do believe that our backgrounds are probably one of the most important things when it comes to our present day relationship with money. And I also learned that it is hard to get people to feel comfortable being vulnerable in a class or in a space with me if I'm not willing to do the same. So, yeah, about me, I grew up in DC and I'm the child of a single mom. My mom is an immigrant from Eritrea. So I then, we had like enough. I would say we were like comfortable enough, but there were definitely like opportunities that I knew I didn't have access to because of money. And so when I went to school, which in the US is a shit show because it's so expensive, even public schools are really expensive. But I went to a private school, a very expensive private school. And I pretty much knew that I was going to be paying for it myself. But, I think when you're 18 and following your desires, and you've like barely really had a job, like it's hard to understand what that really means on the other side. So I graduated in 2009, which was the midst of, like a global recession, with a degree in art with like $75,000 in debt. And I just like didn't even know where to start. So, there's a lot that happened in the middle, but I essentially was forced to really confront my money in a real way and realized through my own journey of healing my stuff that the assumptions that I had made around everyone around me having it all figured out were false and that actually almost nobody had stuff figured out. Even people who like didn't have to pay, whose parents paid for college or who made a lot of money or who grew up with money, X, Y, and Z. I just realized that money was this like pervasive thing that was stopping people from, like moving to where they wanted to go or pursuing their interests or quitting their jobs or leaving their partners, whatever. There's a million things that money allows us to have access to. And I started to see through my own healing journey, I guess you could say, like how much it started to shift my life. And it just felt really essential to bring this work to other people, especially women and especially women of color.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. So I'm really curious what you talked about making certain assumptions about people with money. And I'm curious, did those feed into your own beliefs about money and how you interact with it? Like, I would just love to get into that nuance.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I could talk about this like for hours, and I have talked about it for hours in therapy. But um, yeah, I think because, I felt like I grew up in a situation where I didn't have access to like all of my desires, like, if I wanted to take music lessons or do something like above and beyond, like those were not things that I had access to. So I had these thoughts that like if people like lived in a really big house or like lived with both of their parents or like didn't have to work or had their school paid for or had their parents buy them a car or like all of the things, I saw around me, I assumed that that meant that they were happy, that they were like happier than me and that they had no problems, which I think is like a very common narrative in the West, especially in America. But yeah, and I also assumed that like if you grew up with money, that that was what like qualified you to be good with money, like that
Mhm.
however you came into the world with whatever amount of financial privilege was kind of like the place that you had to be at. And so because I didn't have the experience of like having a lot of money, I felt that that meant that I was bad with money and that was just like my my lot in life like forever.
Mhm.
And I think so that affected so much of my behaviors because it took me a long time to even realize that I had the power to shift things or that I could even make more money. And there's like way more layers of like worthiness and like childhood trauma, etc., underneath all of that. And then even in adulthood, once I started to kind of get my money stuff together, or at least not be in complete denial of it, I noticed that there were still behaviors that I would do that now seem like funny, but like in terms of like belonging, whether it was like
Mhm.
I felt like I needed to have the certain clothes or like the certain shoes or the certain bag or like I needed to look a certain way to like fit in appropriately because otherwise like if I didn't look the part and if I didn't spend the money in the right way, like I would never like be accepted because of this like this is all like extremely subconscious. It's not like I was going around every day like thinking this, but I think because of like my subconscious thoughts of like, oh, but I grew up like this and like, oh, my name is this and my skin color is this, etc. Like it feels like you're kind of like, or I felt, I think like I was like a fraud who was like going to get found out. And so I had to like put on the mask of like successful adult woman living in New York City. And that meant certain things, in the circles that I was running in. But anyway, there's like 1,000 more examples, but that's a good place
For
to start.
sure. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's so amazing that you're really highlighting the subconscious stuff that affects us that we don't always fully realize is happening because it's below the surface or hidden, which is so appropriate for right now, which is Scorpio season, which is so much about like, digging things in the shadows, like, yeah, digging things up, finding things that are kind of buried, which I think is so related to a lot of people's relationship with money, but then also just when we think about the subconscious in general and how it really drives so much of what we do and how we act and behaviors and things like that. When did you come to understand that the subconscious played a really big role, not only in your relationship to money, but just in every facet of life? Like, when did that happen for you?
I mean, I think that I didn't really understand it fully in a theoretical way, probably until I did my coaching training, which was last year. But I think I started to have some deeper awakenings around things that like we could say were subconscious, but I think I didn't understand that framework. Like the example I just gave around like wanting to fit in and spending money to do a certain thing and like, having this certain credit card meaning this thing about me. Like those are things that I uncovered like with my therapist. But even that, like I didn't start therapy until 2018. So that was 5 years ago. So I would say that that's kind of like where the process started. And it's been kind of a consistent drip since then. And I think even now, like as a person who talks about this stuff all the time, like I understand that the subconscious is informing everything I do because like that's in my training and I've read the books and done the stuff. But like the specific ways that it shows up in my life, like continue to reveal themselves to me over time because there's just another thing that it's like, wait, why is this happening? And like, why do I actually believe that thing? And like, oh, that's so weird. And especially, as a person who steps into entrepreneurship, like that just unveils like a whole other layer of like your shadow shit with money. So now I'm just like, oh God, there's more, or like, the rabbit hole, like it goes all the way down. Like you thought that you got to the bottom, but like there's so much more.
Yes. And you bring up a really excellent point, I think, about healing in general, or just noticing patterns within yourself. And like sometimes they never really fully go away. And I think that's like nothing to judge yourself for. It's just like part of being human. Like we're not robots, which is a lot more fun because I personally don't want to be a robot. But I really loved that you said that, because, obviously doing your coaching training and becoming more aware of these things doesn't mean that you have it all figured out. But maybe you're shaking your head for anyone that's just listening. But I don't know. I just feel like, because of the processes you've been through, I'm just making assumptions here. You can maybe bring more awareness to those things and then find ways to move through them and heal them or choose differently. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I think you're right. And I think that so many people, myself included, when they start on their like healing journey, think that like there is a destination and there's going to be like a moment at which you're fully healed and you never have these problems again. But like, it's just not realistic. And I'm grateful to have had teachers who were just like, oh no, there's always just a new level. There's always like a deeper layer of it that you uncover. The real gift in healing is not that you like never feel anything again. It's that you have the awareness and that you have the knowledge to like choose something differently. And so that's what I tell, clients all the time. I talk about it on social media. I talk about it in classes that I teach, is that like there is nowhere that we're going to, like we don't actually have to like shame past versions of ourselves for the things that they believe because like or felt, because those things still come up. Like those things come up for me like regularly. Like I'm not out here existing like as a Zen master with like no stresses about money, but the way in which I treat myself and how I like show up is really different. I was actually just talking about this on Instagram because another part of my money story, which is like not a secret, is that I got this like crazy tax bill from the IRS. That was actually my turning point where I was like, oh shit, I really have to get my money together. And it's like so much better. It's like almost paid off, but I came home the other day and I had these like really thick, like threatening letters from the IRS of like, well, here's how you did this thing wrong. So like, you're going to be in trouble. And I was just like, oh no, like, and I still had a moment of just being like, fuck, even though like I can see that present day me, like, isn't going to have the meltdown. Like a few years ago, like I would have had a meltdown. I would have been crying. I would have just been like, I'm going to go to jail. Like everything is doomed. Like, and instead I got to sit and just think like, okay, like this is just how they send information. You can just wait until the morning and like call them and get clarity and understand and like fix it. And it ended up being a thing that like I was able to fix, right? But there are still moments like that happen all the time, whether it's like a bill gets charged that like I forgot about, or like I thought I was going to like get a client and it didn't work out. Or another example I gave recently was like I was just buying olive oil at the store and I thought it was a normal amount of money and then it was $30 and I just was like, ugh, like at the register and just like, what do I do? So like these moments come up, but it's like, the less healed version of me would have been like, oh, you're so stupid. Like you've made this mistake. Like you should be ashamed. You're unworthy. Whereas like present day me just has like so much more compassion and so much more forgiveness and gets to say one of my favorite sayings from one of my coaches is just like, no wonder I'm having this reaction to this because of all of these things that I know about my past and like all of these things that I know about the world and my identity. And so it starts to actually be like a little bit lighthearted and fun. Like I think it still can be a roller coaster where it's like, yeah, I lay on the floor and cry sometimes about stuff because, like, I'm a human. But then I get to just get up and have the gift of thinking, like, okay, do I want to think about this differently? Do I want to approach this differently than I have in the past? Which, is not as sexy as thinking, like, oh, I'm going to reach enlightenment one day. But I actually do think it feels so much different in my body, that it's worth it, And I think that's like another important thing that I want to highlight for people is that, like, doing this work can be really hard and it can be so uncomfortable and it's like not super sexy and fun. And so I get that. I get why people like want there to be like a prize at the end, but the prize is actually like really subtle and in these like really nuanced moments where you just notice that like you're having a different reaction than you would have before. And like that is so huge, but it's like hard to explain what that feels like until you actually feel it yourself.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like within what you just said, there were like 5 mic drop moments for me, at least. I'm just like, yes, 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 yes. I loved what you said that you mentioned, shame. And then I guess maybe part of the work is being able to transform that shame into like self-compassion. And this is something that I have definitely worked on the past few years because, yeah, I have gotten myself into not so great financial situations in the past. I've taken money for granted, blah, blah, blah. But I really used to beat myself up for it. And still now I catch myself being really mean to myself when I'm like, looking at the bank account balance or, whatever, putting certain financial pieces together and being like, okay, what was that? But I totally agree that we can see the progress we're making in the unsexy moments of like, oh, wow, I'm not having a panic attack over this letter from the IRS or over the balance in my bank account, but just like, okay, this isn't the end of the world. Like, I'm going to find a solution. I'm going to move through this. So I love everything you said about that. And it's interesting. I'm curious, like, what you think about this, because I think a lot of maybe more spiritual teachers, when they speak about money, sometimes it can be a little bit like, you can manifest whatever you want, which, like, on one hand, I believe is true. But then on the other hand, when we're dealing with real life stuff like a tax bill, maybe that huge amount of money isn't going to come tomorrow, no matter how much we think about it, pray about it, whatever. So I wonder, like, I don't know how you navigate kind of, if you think about it at all, like the more spiritual side of money and abundance, and then like the real world, you got to pay your taxes side of things.
Yeah, I love this question. This is a thing that I think about all the time because I do actually think that my approach to helping people with their money is way more spiritual than practical, but I'm certainly not like a manifestation teacher or a manifestation guru. And like, I understand the frustrations that people have with that kind of language of like, oh, like you're just like not trying hard enough, or if you just like believe, like it'll just be there. But I do think that like the the thoughts that you have about money and the energy that you're putting out about money, I like do 100% believe that that is what you are getting back. And I think even on the micro level, like people can understand, or maybe people can understand that, even if we're not talking about money, we're just talking about like behavior and moods. It's like if you're in a bad mood and you're going out, like you're only going to see like bad things happening because, you have that negative bias, like predetermining everything. And so, but if you're in a great mood, Like, you're not like, the bad stuff is just going to like roll off your back, or like you're going to be smiling at the person at the coffee shop and then they're going to give you a free muffin, or like, who knows, right? And I think it's also like the same with how we approach our own money. And this was like a lesson that I had to learn like over time, and like the very hard way, because the first iteration of my money healing journey, I was like, yeah, I'll just like learn how to have a budget, and I'll like make it really strict, and like I'll just be controlling all the money, and I'll be obsessing and like looking over all the money. And like that worked, doing air quotes, like it shifted like the amount of money in my bank account, but it also like didn't do anything for like the anxiety and like how I felt inside, and like didn't offer me that much leeway if like an unexpected bill came up, or if I did just decide to go on a trip with my friends, or like go to a dinner that like oops was like more money than I thought it was going to be. And so then I think that creates a situation where like I am then sort of like reinforcing my own shame and unworthiness based on my actions. So I know this might seem like a little bit tangential to the like manifestation thing, but I think it's like the energy with which we hold ourselves. It can also be like the same energy with which we like approach money, which can then be the same energy that we're putting out into the world. And shifting all of those things can like dramatically shift your life. And again, this is one of those things that is like so hard to fully understand until you experience it. But I've felt this on so many, so many times this year as I've like stepped out attempting to like do entrepreneurship full time, where there were moments where I was like, oh no, like I'm running out of money, and like maybe I'm not making the amount of money that I want this month. And so like, my patterning and the programming was to be like, well, this is cause for panic, and let's freak out, and everything is over. The world is ending. I'm going to be homeless, And then I had to sit and really learn to sit in the present moment and be grateful for what actually is true and what I actually know to be true, which again is a thing that other manifestation people, not that I am a manifestation person, but that manifestation people say is like, if you don't appreciate what you have, like the next thing isn't going to come to you. Right. And so I think that, what do I want? How do I want to like finalize this thought? I think it's really true that nothing about your situation can actually change, but how you feel about it and how you relate to it completely can change. And I do believe that that then has the possibility to shift your availability to like see opportunities and to see positive things. And then sure, like I believe that that could lead to having more money. And even if it isn't like a one-to-one, like, oh no, like the tax bill, but I thought positively about it, and so this like pile of money appeared, like maybe it's not quite so correlated, but it also just like feels better. So I'm like all for it. But I do think it's important to recognize that like there is like the deep emotional work that has to happen alongside that. And there is a really deep understanding of yourself that has to go alongside that. And then there's also just the practicalities of living in the world. Like if you're looking for a job, you can't just like sit around and hope that people are going to call you out of the blue, right? Like you have to like apply for stuff. You have to tell people you're looking. But I do also think that the energy with which you do that can really change what like comes back to you.
I completely agree, because yeah, if you just think about it, even on the level of perspective in just like really black and white terms, like someone who sees things a little more optimistically versus someone who's maybe a bit more of a pessimist in the exact same situation, likely the person that is, trying their best to be optimistic despite whatever circumstances they're in, they're going to be able to see opportunities. Or because maybe the person that's like not seeing things that way is going to perceive opportunities as like something else, like, I don't know, a threat or the wrong thing, or no, there's no point, I'm not even going to attempt this. So I do think all of that is so essential. And yes, I think what I have an issue with sometimes in terms of, the the spiritual way of seeing things, sometimes the way people talk about money in those kind of terms, sometimes I don't want to like, put out a blanket statement or whatever, is I think in some situations it can be hard to overnight like shift all your thoughts to positive thoughts and like, say the mantras and whatever, if there's the emotional side of things that you're not dealing with. That's been my experience. Once I fully let myself, as you were kind of saying, be present with all of it, feel the things, feel the emotions, whatever. And, that's an ongoing thing. But it was only until I got, deeper within that things like affirmations actually made a difference and I could actually believe them because I had confronted the darker shit within me and then moved on to that stuff. But obviously, like everyone's process is a bit different, but I wonder if you feel similarly or have anything to say about that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, 100%. And I think that's why I think that our nervous system and trauma is really important to address with money because I think that's the negative side of some of this like manifestation or just like positive affirmation work is that it's not really acknowledging the varieties of lived experiences that people have. And the reality of your nervous system is that it is trying to keep you safe. But if you are in a space of like real financial need, real instability, real insecurity, whether that is emotional or physical or whatever, like your body literally can't, like, it doesn't have full access to like all of your cognitive functions. It can't think creatively. Like, you're not going to see those opportunities as opportunities. Like you said, you're going to see them as threats. So, it's like we have to sort of tend to like what's underneath the surface, like the basement, before we can start like, building on like a third floor addition, if we're going to use like a house metaphor. So, yeah, because like it's like, I feel so frustrated by this word because I feel like it doesn't like mean anything until you like experience it. But I do feel like until it's really embodied and like your body actually feels safe to believe these things that you're saying, like none of them are going to work, right? Because if I'm like struggling to pay my rent and feed my kids and I'm just like shaking with anxiety, like my body is literally just like, okay, let's like keep her alive. Like there's no space for anything else. Like there's literally not enough fuel to run this machine. Then me telling myself like, yeah, I can be a millionaire or like I can start a business, like it's not going to do anything. It's just like going in one ear and out the other versus like actually feeling safe in your body to like physically and emotionally expand into new possibilities. So it's so hard because like I think we always want with so many things, but especially with money, want there to be this like quick fix or this like silver bullet where we can like avoid dealing with like the shame and the pain and all of the stuff underneath. But like you literally cannot have the highs without addressing the lows. Unfortunately, as much as I wish it wasn't true.
Yes, that is so true. And I like what you're saying about there being no quick fixes. I think it's really important to remember. I think honestly, like there's no quick fixes for many things in life, especially if it's to do with these like deep relationships we have with whatever area of life it is. I know that to be true for me when it comes to like my own money stuff. And yeah, I love everything you're saying about the nervous system. And I think like from my understanding, just like on a physiological level, if your nervous system is like pretty fried, like if you're burnt out, stressed, very anxious, like it might be hard for like all that to change overnight and for your nervous system to be like completely regulated overnight. That can take some time, like getting everything within you to feel safe, like whatever your circumstances are. So I love that you brought that up. And yeah, I feel like I really fully learned that this year because I had like kind of a weird summer for various reasons. And I remember at one point I had joined this masterclass that was about like money, abundance, whatever, but also its relation to the nervous system. So very apropos what we're talking about right now. And I asked a question to the woman that was like hosting. And I was basically like, I don't know if I should go like all in my business or do something or just like give up and do something else. And she was like, well, first of all, it doesn't have to be so black and white. Second of all, like, you know, maybe consider a part-time job and then keep going on your business. Like, you know, and that just made me realize I was seeing things very black and white, which usually doesn't help us in terms of navigating life. And since I got a part-time job like a couple months ago, I notice my nervous system feels so much better. And as you were saying, I have more access to my creativity because I'm not creating or doing things or trying things from a place of like scarcity and worrying about like how much money I'm going to make, like how many clients I'm going to bring in. You know, if I do this, if I offer this class, like how much money is, you know, I'm not thinking of things that way anymore. And I can like really take my time. So that's like a huge aha moment I had this year.
Yeah. I mean, I have had versions of that. And I think it's really important to talk about, especially in the realm of entrepreneurship. But I think it's one of the things in general that we can understand. Okay, I'm thinking about kids, right? And like how things work in childhood. And again, like I'm not a child psychologist by any means, but it's like kids learn how to take risks by knowing that they have this sort of like family unit and they feel safe to like come back to it. So, you know, it's sometimes like if the child is like with its mother, like it'll feel like, okay, I have this like perimeter to like go out and explore in the forest or whatever. And then I know that I can come back to my mom because there's this like position of safety. And I think if we think of ourselves, or me thinking of myself at least like a little kid, is really helpful, where I'm like, these are these like basic needs that I have to have met, or otherwise I'm going to be in this space. And back to what we were talking about, like the manifestation and energy, it's like if the energy of like, I don't have money, I'm afraid, I'm desperate is like what you're bringing to your business and your clients, it's like, this is like very woo woo, but like it's not clean energy, right? And like you're actually kind of like manipulating and using the people to get what you want instead of actually like coming from service, which is like what most of us are doing in our businesses. Even if we're selling a product, it's like, okay, we're trying to like help you with your life. So things just get really muddy. And it's, you know, I think I make a lot of parallels to romantic relationships as well, where like if you are dating a partner or like you're with a partner and you like need them for everything and like you desperately need them to like validate you every day and like give you money and like bathe you and like house you, like it's also just like not sexy. Like there's no space for like anything like juicy and desirable and pleasurable. And I think like we kind of, not to say that like you need to be responsible for yourself and you can like never ask for help, right? But it's like having this baseline of stability is like actually what we need before we can go out and get those like higher level things. And for everybody, that's really different, right? And for everyone, like everyone's nervous system is different. And some people's nervous systems, as much as like your logical brain might want you to like be that really successful entrepreneur who's out there taking risks, like that might also be seen as dangerous to your nervous system. And so your body will find ways to sabotage you like over and over and over, right? So it's kind of like the balance of like, okay, what do I need to feel comfortable and safe? And then what is actually just like programming of alleged safety that I also get to shift in my own body, which is like very deep work and like the work of a lifetime. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And one kind of belief that I was reflecting on when I was watching your Aura Collective class, because you were speaking about exactly this, like the beliefs about money you have that like actually keep you safe, right? Because it's really easy to just be like, oh, these money beliefs aren't serving me, blah, blah, blah. But it's very important to understand what secret benefit it's giving you, right? And often it's like a feeling of safety, even if it doesn't seem logical. And one of them for me that I was thinking about today was because I had a little bit of a burnout from the last full-time job that I had a lot of resistance to getting any sort of a new job that I didn't feel like I had any control over, because I think secretly my body was worried about getting on the verge of burnout again. So that's something I've been understanding and has been really helpful. And talking about like your childlike self or your inner child or whatever, I feel like as I've been easing into this part-time job, along the way, I've kind of been like, see, it's okay to have this job. We're not, we're still prioritizing rest. We're still getting to do the things we want to do. And we have more resources and we don't have to worry so much about like how we're going to get our needs met. So that's been really interesting for me. And I think that is such a key thing to think about. Like, not only like, what are your money beliefs, especially the ones that aren't so helpful, but how are they benefiting you in one way or another?
Yeah, there's so much in there to talk about. But yeah, I think that can be one of the hardest things for people to understand, is that leap to putting together the pieces from this thing that feels really uncomfortable to understanding like why it's actually happening. And I think as humans, we have to remember that like everything we're doing is for a reason and is for efficiency and is for safety. Like this behavior would not exist if we were not getting some benefit out of it, even if it is not our desired benefit. And I think the thing that you said about, I mean, I have so much trauma from previous jobs. So I deeply relate to that. And I think, but that can be like just a hard thing with money in general or with life in general, is to believe that because our brains and nervous systems are wired for efficiency and to recognize patterns from the past, like that's a real thing to understand, that like the future, the idea that like something in the future could be different than a similar thing that you experienced in the past is like so, that's like very complex for our bodies to understand. And that's why there would be like, no, danger, danger, like don't do this thing. And it's so, that's why like knowing yourself and knowing your own nervous system is so important, because otherwise you kind of just like, what is that Young quote? Like, I can't remember it right now, but like, oh, until you make the unconscious conscious, like it'll rule your life, and you'll incorrectly call it fate. But I'm messing it up. I'm butchering it, but people understand. Whereas like, that's how I think we get into these situations where people are just like, oh, like jobs aren't for me, or like, oh, like things never work out, or like, oh, like that's why I can't date like painters anymore, or like, fill in the blank thing. And like, yes, there is important information that we get to notice about ourselves. Like, I know deep in my soul that like I'm probably not cut out for full-time employment in the long term because of a lot of things about my personality. But does it mean that like if I do decide to take on a part-time or a full-time job, that it has to be exactly the same as like the bad experiences I've had in the past? And no. And it's kind of the same with money, right? Where I think that I talk about this with clients where they're like, oh, but I've always been struggling or scrambling for money. And so it's like impossible for them to imagine a future in which like that is not possible. Or even something as minor as like, oh, living with roommates is terrible, so it's like always going to be terrible, or X, Y, and Z, right? So we get to remember that, like, as frustrating as it is, that our bodies and our nervous system are trying to help us, and they're trying to save us time by just saying, well, like this thing looks kind of like this thing that we've experienced that we didn't like, so like don't do that. But there's ways that like we get to work to create new levels of safety within our body so that we can stretch and take on bigger and better things. But that's like a piece of the work that I'm trying to help people do, to recognize that like your past does not dictate your future.
Yes, I love that so much. And I think it's really important to remind ourselves and trust ourselves, as hard as it can be, to understand that we're always coming to a new thing with, what we've learned, and just like understanding that like we've learned something, even if we don't really fully feel it or understand it. And even if we like, quote unquote, make a mistake, okay, that's fine. That's more teaching, understanding, that we're absorbing, and yeah, to just come to everything with the trust that like we can make a different decision, or it might turn out totally differently than what we think it will be. And even if it's the same, okay, like we feel the feelings if they're negative or whatever, and we move on and keep going. Like that's how I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to or maybe I was talking about this, yeah, about like forgiveness and compassion for yourself, right? Because I think what you're describing can be really frustrating on the healing journey where it's like, oh, but I've done all this work and I'm just in exactly the same situation and everything is the same and I haven't learned anything. Like, at least this is how like my inner voice talks to me.
Yeah.
Um, but like I think we also get to recognize that like, is it actually exactly the same? And like maybe I got myself out of it faster than I would have in the past. And maybe I talked to myself differently in the process and didn't make myself feel like shit, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a constant, I feel like it's, I work with people about money, but it's really like knowing yourself, like knowing what you want, like loving yourself, and like you said, trusting yourself. Because one of the challenges that so many people come to me with is that they don't feel confident about like what to do with their money. They don't trust themselves to like stick to a budget or make the investment choices, etc. But like trust is and confidence are not things that come from knowledge. They're things that come from practice and from like implementation and like showing up for yourself and like keeping your word to yourself. And again, back to like the inner child stuff, because this is work that I've also had to do with myself, especially in entrepreneurship, is just being like, yeah, I do actually trust myself. Like, I trust myself to make a decision, and it doesn't have to be the right decision, but I can just trust myself to know that I can come back from that, to know that I'm going to be kind to myself through that whole thing. And that's what builds confidence, because like confidence is not perfection. And I think that, as a recovering perfectionist, I think that can be a really hard thing for people to sit with, especially with money, because there's so much, again, shaming narrative around like the right things to do with your money and like the wrong things to do with your money. And if you like get into credit card debt, well, you might as well just like end it now because like you have done this horrible thing, instead of just saying like, oh, okay, like I made this choice. I understand now the full implications of it, and I trust myself to like come back from it, because everything is ultimately like fixable in our lives. It might take longer than we like. It might be more uncomfortable than we like. But that's again like one of the biggest lessons that I learned for myself. I was saying earlier that I was just like, I'm doomed to be bad with money for my entire life. And then I did a few years of work and people were like, oh, she's an expert. Like she knows all this stuff. And I was like, if I can like do that and like reinvent myself, then like literally anybody can. I'm not saying again that it's like an overnight process, but it's totally possible to change like your entire reality if you really want to.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I would love if you could just talk a little bit more about like how you kind of transitioned from because you were working more in the art world before, and maybe you still are, I'm not really sure, but I'm just curious like how you focus more on the money stuff and how you realize like this could be part of your career path.
Yeah. So I think it probably happened for a lot of different reasons. Like feeling disillusioned with, I was working in a role that was like kind of adjacent to marketing and like selling people stuff. And that just felt really icky for me. And then the more that I started to go into money work myself, I was like, ooh, like I don't ethically feel good about working indirectly for like a client who is just trying to make people buy stuff that they don't need, like that is not in alignment with like my values as like a human on the earth. And I get that other people, like, that might not be a thing that bothers you. I'm not saying that it's like fundamentally the worst thing in the world, but like I just didn't feel good about it for myself. And then the more that I thought, I started talking to people in my sphere, a lot of whom were like women, a lot of whom were like artists, musicians, people who were like trying to sort of like put their creative energy out into the world and were feeling thwarted. The more that like, and this I guess is also pretty spiritual or whatever, or political, is like, it actually started to feel like radical to me and like revolutionary to empower people to do their creative work. Because I noticed, like you said in your burnout story, like I was burned out. Part of my story was that I had this full-time job and I still wasn't making enough money to pay all of my debts. So I had to do like crazy side hustles. I would like work on the weekends. There would be times where I would count and I'd be like, oh, I haven't had a day off in like 3 weeks. And like my body was deteriorating. And obviously my mental health also was deteriorating. And even though I had a capital C, like creative job, like I did a cool thing, I was like, oh, I have no energy for my own side projects. I have monetized every single creative thing that I do. And I was like, this is horrible because I have now made my entire life work and I have nothing left over for myself. And when that job ended, because I was working, with big corporate clients and for a company, like all of the things I had worked on for 7 years, like I don't own. I can't claim them as mine. Like I basically did work for nothing. I mean, not nothing. Like I get that like I was like housed and fed and whatever, but I was just like, this sucks. And it actually wasn't until the pandemic, thankfully, obviously like lots of bad shit happened, but where I had a lot of time and I was like, oh, I used to feel like inspired in the past. I used to have access to like creative energy. I used to come up with these ideas all the time. And I started to realize that money, as frustrating as a system that it is, like I'm not advocating for capitalism. I think it blows in a lot of ways, but like having more money means more time and means more freedom of choice and does mean that you get to have access to more creativity, because if you're not worried about your fucking survival every day, you actually get to have creative thoughts of like, okay, what if I did cobble these different jobs together to make something cool? What if I did do this project with my friends? What if I did start my company? And so like, this is something I could like really preach on for hours, but it started to really anger me because I was like, well, who can like afford to be creative? And like, what does that mean about all of the works that exist in the world? Like, are they all just going to be like white men? Like, that's going to be everything that we have when there's so many people that are living like exciting, inspired lives and have a lot to offer. And I just started to see like money as the entry point for that to really open that up for people and also for myself, because like while I love coaching and I love talking about money, like I am still a creative person at heart and I still have other things that I want to do. And so, the business for me is like a vehicle to help people, but also to get to do that for myself. And I think that there are many ways that people can like put their impact into the world and change things, but I do think that like art and creative expression and living like fully actualized lives is like a real way to shift that. So I just was like, oh, if I can be the person to empower people, because I, was a creative person who thought that I was just like bad with money and didn't understand stuff. I also think there's this narrative that like, because you're like being creative and like thinking about numbers and thinking about money, or being spiritual and thinking about money, like those things don't go together. And so I want to be here to be like, actually, all of that's a lie. Like, money can be creative. Like, you deciding what to spend your money on is like a creative decision, right? Like, you saving up this money for a vacation or a podcast mic or like whatever you want, like the ways that you get to do that, you do get to be really creative about it. And I want people to help, like, turn those inherent skills that they have like on themselves to then just like open up more possibilities.
Yes, I love that so much. I like how, because I think sometimes a lot of talk about money, especially people that are money coaches or known for, I don't know, being wealthy or helping people invest, whatever, don't always focus on like the creative aspect of it. And I like that that's what you're highlighting, because I think it's so true. And I like that you're really trying to help people dispel these myths of like, oh, if you're creative, you're going to be like broke or whatever bullshit that doesn't have to be your truth. So I really like that that's what you're passionate about. And I can feel that, yeah, you're going to help lots of people with that. So I'm excited for you. I want to talk a little bit about your astrology and human design, because I was kind of like nerding out on yours earlier today, preparing. And can I just say that your big three is like in astrology is so perfect for the work that you're doing. So for everyone watching, listening, Selomé is a Capricorn sun. So that's like boss energy. I'm responsible. I'm taking care of the resources. I'm building a legacy kind of vibes. Scorpio moon, which is like really able to get to the depth of something. So like, you know, you're exploring the emotional depth of money and so many other things. Also, like the eighth house that Scorpio is related to is about shared resources, which makes so much sense. And then you're a Taurus rising, which ruled by Venus can also be about money and values and personal resources. So I'm just like, if this person is not teaching about money, like that could be a problem. But I love how aligned that is. And another thing I really loved about your astrology is that your midheaven, which has so much to do with like your career or public persona, is in Aquarius, and Aquarius energy is so innovative. I think like I described your work a little bit like that in opening this episode. So I like that you're bringing a fresh approach to these topics that can feel like stale or scary or annoying or blah. Like you're bringing like an innovation and a lightness to them. So I think that's really cool and seems very aligned astrologically.
Cool. Yeah. I love that. I know it's like, I feel like in these moments, it's always like, did I choose the path or did the path choose me? But yeah, I think, you know, that's also part of the journey of me figuring out my relationship to work and figuring out the money stuff is like, yeah, like I realized like I only want to do something that's really deep. I only want to do something that's really impactful, and I only want to do things that help people live like the juiciest, most luxurious lives. And like, yes, I can bring in my Capricorn spreadsheets to help you do that, but like the work, it's so funny because like a lot of people, you know, things are changing, but people don't necessarily know what like what is a money coach and like what do you actually do? Like, are you like a financial advisor? And I was like, no, actually, like money stuff is like really boring. Like I'm like, you know, I learned all the things to like optimize. Like I can teach you about like stocks and like interest rates and like how all that stuff works. But like that to me is like not interesting. Like the juicy stuff is like, what are you going to do with it? Like, what do you want your life to look like? What are the things that you haven't even allowed yourself to dream of because they have seemed so out of reach for you? And they still might not be like, you might not have the yacht or the like live in masseuse or like whatever, but like, what are the small ways that you can sort of like inch yourself like towards them, you know? And I think that's one of my favorite times of working with clients is like, let's think like above just like your bare minimum. Like, what are the things that like feel really delicious? Like, do you want to get acupuncture every other week? Do you want to get massages? Like, let's put your nails in your budget. Like, that's a thing that I've done for myself. And it's like so fun. And back to like the inner child stuff, I feel like, yeah, I'm always just like, how can I like delight like inner me And like, what also are the things about my life? You know, I feel like there's so many like memes about this that are like, you're
Mhm.
living like the dream of your past self, or like you have something you always wanted. But I think like, yeah, it's not just money to have money for the sake of money, but it's like money to feel really good. And for me, like, again, like sounds so corny, like past me would have been like, oh, I can't believe she's saying this. But like to like delight my inner child. And sometimes I think about like a younger version of me, like looking at my life now and like what she would think. And I think that like she would think it's pretty fucking cool. And I just like want to continue to like delight that version of me because like she still exists inside of me. But yeah, anyway, I detoured from astrology, but yeah, I love astrology and all of the stuff. So always happy to talk about it.
Yeah, that was a beautiful detour though. And I think, yeah, it's so important to, because yeah, it can be really easy to get into the Capricorn, like budget, spreadsheets, whatever, and that can be very important and needed. But yeah, we have to enjoy. We have to enjoy things in general. We have to enjoy our money. And I also think it's important to like, circulate things. Cause it's like when I'm paying for my whatever osteopath session, then like I'm spreading resources to that person, like things are circulating, things are moving. Like it's really interesting. There'll be times where like I'm in kind of more like stingy saving mode and like resisting like booking an appointment or buying myself something I like want but also need. And then it's so funny, like often the second after I do the thing, like something else happens, like someone books a session or whatever else. So it's really interesting, like seeing how all that like comes into play as well. And like just like the fun and the magic of it, because it doesn't always have to be so like budget or like paying off my whatever it is. It's like, yeah, we can have fun with it too,
Yeah. And that's, there's so much to say in that. But like, yeah, I think that can be like treating money as more of a spiritual practice. And that's the thing that I started to realize for myself because I also, again, because of the pandemic, like I stopped going to a gym and I started just like paying individual like fitness teachers who became like friends and like very important people in my life. And I was like, yeah, there could be a part of me that would look at like the line item on my budget and say like, this is so crazy that you're spending this much money to like go to Pilates. But then when I think about like, no, I'm actually like investing in this other person and like this is how I want to use my money. Like that feels so good. And to then kind of segue back to like the Capricorn, like practical side of things, like the way that I even got into like the deeper emotional side of money is that I was for sure approaching it initially just like, well, here's the spreadsheet, guys. And like the problem is that you just like don't know how to do it. And like, I don't know why you can't figure it out. Like, here are the numbers, And then the more I worked with like actual human people who were not me and who had different baggage and different trauma than me, I was like, oh, there's like way more to this money stuff. It's not just that people like don't know how to make a budget or do simple addition. It's that there's like really serious like childhood generational stuff, like discrimination, like there's all sorts of layers on top of like how we're walking through the world that are impacting like all of our decisions. So I think that while like again this work is hard and deep and like very serious, like I think the goal is to like open up the possibilities to make it more fun and expansive and joyful and sexy because like why not? Life should not be about misery.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also segueing a little bit into human design, you're a generator, and so much of your mission just by being a generator is creating good energy, like enveloping people with your joy and with your excitement. And maybe sometimes that's about like spreadsheets, and then maybe sometimes that's about like helping people uncover their shadows or limiting beliefs or whatever it is when it comes to money. And I also loved that your profile in human design is 1-4. And the 1 is very much the investigator. So I'm guessing you're someone that just loves to learn and dig into things. And then the 4 is more about your network and the people you meet. And yeah, and those two together are so much about sharing what you learn with the people around you. So I love that you've stepped into this role of like coach, mentor, teacher. Like that, to me, that makes so much sense with that configuration of things. And you have like a couple of the gifts in your chart, or the gates, like the little numbers on the human design chart. Your most prominent one is gate 58, which has different names depending on what you're reading, but it's the gate of aliveness, of joy, of vitality. So you're really meant to spread that to people and like find that in whatever interests you, you know? And it's also energy that really wants to help heal others and empower them so that they can also feel this sense of joy and vitality. And so I love that, especially when you were talking about like the fun parts of money. Like I just really felt that. So I love that so much. And then the other one that I really noticed that I thought was really relevant is you have gate 51, which is called the gate of shock, which isn't such a nice name. Other people call it like impact. And so, yeah, you're going to have an impact on people, but it's, you know, because of things that are really important to you personally. Like it's not always about like, what does the collective need? Like obviously the collective or other people need what you are sharing, but it comes from this really personal place. Yeah. And you're also quite ambitious in your own way, having this gate.
Don't I know it? Yeah, I remember the first time I got a human design reading, like I was like, I'm going to be cagey and like not tell you anything about what I'm working on. And like, she literally was like, I don't know, I feel like you're supposed to be like teaching people about something like money or this or that. And I was like, yep, check. Like, that's exactly it. Yeah, I think human design has been really helpful for me just in terms of like business stuff for sure, and just like understanding. And I think in hindsight, like I can see the ways in which like these patterns and these things that I've been doing have always been playing out. Like I am an obsessive learner researcher who then is like, hey guys, like, well, here's what I found. And that's actually how this all started. Like I didn't like set out to be like, oh, well, I've fixed my money, so like, let me go help other people. I just like wrote up a document. I wrote an email to my friend because she was asking me for help. And then another friend asked, and then I was like, I should just like put this on the internet. And I just like posted it on Facebook because this was when, you know, people were still posting on Facebook like that, or people my age rather. And then it kind of went from there, and everyone was like, whoa. And I was like, oh, like that's when I was like, oh, people like don't know this stuff. So yeah, my entire mission in life is like, if I can save you some time, because like I have done the research and I have looked for all of the ways out of this. So let me tell you that if this is the way for me, it's probably helpful for you. Yeah. But yeah, I love that that's what you see in it, because that's what I feel. But I feel like it's just becoming clearer and clearer to me over time that it's like, yes, this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing.
Totally. Or at least for now, you know, like maybe it'll change and evolve for sure. Right. But it's so interesting. Human design has definitely helped me understand that, you know, it's often the things that come easy to us or that we take for granted. That's what we're meant to share. And it doesn't have to be so complicated. Obviously, you know, we always need to be building our skills. And I think any good coach is always learning in one way or another, practicing, expanding their minds. But like, it's really funny how we sometimes just think everyone knows about this thing that we're thinking of all the time. And people are like, wait, what? I've never thought of it like that before. Or you say something or share something that you think is so basic. And then other people are like, whoa, wow. Like I really never thought of it that way. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. Great. Yeah.
100%. And especially, I mean, in so many parts of my life, but especially with money and the deeper that I've gone into like somatics, like nervous system trauma stuff, like I'm just like, you have trauma. And people are like, wait, what? You know, like even that is like a really radical idea for many people that, you know, is expanding as I think people are learning more about this stuff. But like even the idea that like I don't think there's a way that like me 5 years ago, like I would have been like, okay, sure, I have these things that have been like painful in my life, but they were like the big like things. And I was like, okay, there's like this big thing and I can see how it's affecting like my romantic relationships or whatever, but like money, like whatever. But then like the more that you go in, you're just like, oh, or like you might think like, oh, it's all this one parent's fault. It's like all of them, you know? And then the more you go, you're like, oh, okay, it's both of you and it's also me and it's also generational stuff and it's also society. Yeah, there's just so much. So yeah, for now it's money. And I mean, it's not a joke, but I do always say that like, yeah, my work is around money, but like really this could be substituted for like literally anything in your life because it's all the same. Like the relationship that you have with money is often very parallel to like romantic relationships or relationships with your family or relationships with your friends, relationships with yourself. So like the beauty of doing this work is that it does really start to ripple out and you start to see like how everything in your life can start to expand once you better understand like what's underneath the surface.
Yes, completely. And yeah, things are always interconnected, often in a way that we really don't understand or is not logical. So I think that's a really good point to make that, yeah, doing work on money and your relationship with it will definitely have like a ripple effect to basically everything else in your life, I would argue. I want to wrap up a little bit. I still have like a few more fun questions, but I want to just ask if you have one specific tip or question or thought to leave us with in terms of thinking about our relationship to money or improving it. I know that's really vague, but whatever comes to you right now.
Yeah, I think what I usually invite clients to do to start is to really understand the beliefs that they're working with, because from there you can start to go backwards to like, what were the events that led to me having that? And how are these beliefs impacting my behaviors in the present? And so a lot of this is stuff that, you know, past me resisted, like journaling prompts. I was just like, I'll read the book, but like I won't do the prompts. And then I was like, okay, this is dumb. You can't just like, well, I thought it was dumb. Like because you can't really like read about money stuff and then just shift your relationship about money. It's all about self inquiry and self understanding. So if you don't understand where you're coming from, there's no way that you can shift anything. So some really easy prompts to get started with are things like money is. Like my dad was blank when it came to money. My mom was blank when it came to money. And this is stuff I talked about in the workshop. But, you know, I think that is some of the stuff, some of the work that I do with clients initially that is so illuminating for them. Because like you kind of think you know, but until you really write down like, oh, my mom or dad or other parental figure did this, like you can't actually really bridge the gap. Like the number of times that clients are like, oh, I'm doing exactly what my dad did. And then you're like, okay. And I think that also can start to help with the forgiveness is like, this is learned behavior. Like, I'm not just like fundamentally flawed. Like, you know, the same way you get your like hair color or your eye color, like you inherit things from your parents. And some of it, again, goes like deeper back and is generational stuff that, you know, is not even conscious to you at all. But I think once you start to understand, like, okay, like rich people are, and then like what comes out, like for so many people, it's like greedy, like lucky, like evil. And then you're just like, oh, okay, interesting. So if I think that rich people are greedy and evil, like why would I ever want to become rich? What are the ways that I might be sabotaging myself? Like,
Yeah.
you know, and then that just starts to open up a lot more doors, because I think the challenge with doing this work or any personal development work is that as a human, you only know your experience within your own body. And the way that you see the world is how you assume that the world is. But all of these are just lenses that have been put over, and like there is no objective reality. So like to then go like pretty woo woo and back to like the manifestation stuff a little bit is like, okay, if we start to remove all of these like limiting lenses, like could anything be possible? And like the answer is yes, right?
Maybe, possibly. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And not to say that that's like super easy, because like the removing those lenses is super hard. Like that's the work. But once you start to see like, oh, I've been making all of these decisions on the assumption that like this thing is true. And if that's not true, then what does that mean? And maybe like a clear example can be tangible. Like for me, I had a job and I was making like, a certain amount of money a year. And in my mind, there was no way that I could make more money than that. I was like, this is it. I've peaked. And like, there wasn't a way I could make more money than that at that job. Like, I now understand that in hindsight. But like, people get paid all sorts of different amounts of money to do different work for no fucking reason, right? So like, why is that true? But like, what did me believing that that's the maximum amount of money that I could make do for me? It meant that like, oh, I can't get another job that pays me more, so I have to do all of these side hustles to fill in the blanks. Like, I have to monetize all of my creative skills, whether it's like DJing or photography. I have to burn myself out because there's no way that I could be comfortable with money and have it be easy. Like, the only way that this could happen for me is for it to be hard. And that's another belief, right? Like, that earning money has to be hard. Yeah. And then we can also layer on, like, you can't make money doing creative things. And so I was like, oh, well, so I'm making this amount of money doing a creative thing. I don't believe I can earn more than that doing this. And it's got to be hard. So I'm like trapped. Like either I have to like go be an accountant or like I have to live in this like hell of my own creation. But then over time, I was like, wait, so what if that's all a lie? Like, then like that opens the doors for so many things. Like I could get another job that pays me a lot of money. I could just quit and start a creative business. I could just be telling people what color to paint their walls. And maybe that's like my $1 million business. I'm not saying that that's like a good idea, but like the possibilities really are endless. But like we're trained to just like put these ceilings on ourselves. And that's not to deny like the realities of like privilege and like our society and how those things work, because like those things are very real. But there are also ways in which we are like doubling down the limits on ourselves with like additional stuff by like further buying into those stories that like we don't have to.
Yes, absolutely. You have given us so much to think about. I can't wait to listen back to this and like absorb it again. I want to end with 5 more fun questions. At least I think they're more fun. I hope you do too. Since it's Scorpio season, I want to know, what have you been a little bit obsessed with lately?
Oh my gosh, what have I been obsessed with lately? I mean, I've been thinking about ghosts a lot. I don't know if it's like quite an obsession. Yeah, I guess I've been obsessed with like just getting more in touch with like my own sort of like spiritual woo-woo stuff and figuring out how that relates to business, whether it's like intuition or psychic things or energies, because like I really like, I think past me was like so practical and was like, none of this is real. And then I started to just like have more and more experiences in my life where I was like, that's weird. So I'm kind of like expanding more into that like realm of spookiness. So I'm kind of into that right now.
Love that. What is the last thing that you invested in or spent like a decent chunk of money on?
Some programs that I'm going to be in some that are about like systems and content creation, and one that is about deeper nervous system embodiment. So I can continue on my business journey without getting stalled in the ways that I've noticed up until now. So myself.
I love it. Perfect. That's great. What is your favorite snack at the moment?
What is my favorite snack? I'm not a great snacker, but I've been eating a lot of like tortilla chips. I've gotten obsessed with this like this one brand that like, what is it called? Vista Hermosa, which I guess is only in the US, but they're just like really flavorful and good, but I'm very much like a sweet and salty person. So I'm like, I need to have like a chocolatey thing and like a chip at the same time. Or like I need to have popcorn and like a soda. Yeah. So chips. I've just been eating tortilla chips. That sounds boring, but
love it. Oh, I'm sure they're really good tortilla chips.
They are really good.
What is your favorite thing about fall, autumn, whatever you'd like to call it?
Oh my gosh. I love drinking warm beverages and the leaves changing. This is not just one thing. And the leaves changing.
Multiple.
And Halloween decorations. Like, I just find them so pure and delightful. They just like crack me up.
They're so fun. Yeah, I like when people have skeletons like doing weird things together or alone.
Yes, definitely. The skeletons doing weird stuff. And there's one house in my neighborhood that has like what has to be like a 20-foot tall skeleton. And I'm just like, I cannot wait until I have a yard because I am going, like, I need that. I guess it just ignites like inner child joy in me because Halloween just feels like so pure and fun.
Yes, totally. And my last little question here, what's a song that brings you joy?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. Okay, recently I've been listening to Stevie Wonder, Overjoyed, and I feel like that does shoots something into my heart.
I love it. So good. Well, thank you so much, Selomé. I feel like I could talk to you way longer than this, but we got to keep moving. We got to get this show on the road. Your day is just starting. But I really thank you for your time and everything you've shared. I know everyone who listens, watches is going to get so much value out of this. Why don't also you share with us where people can find you, what you've got planned, if you know yet, or just in general, how people can work with you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is such a delightful conversation that bridges a lot of my interests, woo-woo, magic, spirituality, and money. The easiest way to keep track of me is probably Instagram, which is Net Positive Money. There's links to my website and everything, but what do I have planned? I have a group program planned. All the dates for these things are very loose, but Instagram will be the first place that you find out about when they're happening.
Okay, I love that. So everyone follow Selomé on Instagram to stay updated. And yeah, thank you again so much. And talk to you soon, I'm sure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.